Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive on something super interesting, influential outliers.
Yeah.
Those data points that can really mess with a study's results. We're
Mm.
looking at this paper by Herman Guinness
Okay.
and Harry Joe. Guinness rhymes with beer, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And it's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, these data points can really throw a wrench in things. Even for experienced researchers, it's tricky.
Yeah, so imagine you're reading a study, right, about how sleep affects test scores.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one person, they only slept for an hour, but they totally aced the test.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the kind of data point that can really, skew the results, especially if it's one of these influential outliers.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
So Guinness and Joe, they break down some of the common myths that researchers fall for when they're trying to find these outliers. So myth number one is that you can just use simple cutoffs. Like you just toss out the top and bottom 1% of the data.
Right.
Seems pretty logical, right?
Yeah, it seems like it would make sense, but
Yeah. The thing is, just because a data point is far away from the others,
yeah.
it doesn't automatically mean it's actually messing with the results.
So it's not enough to just look at how far out there it is. We need to see if it's actually influencing things, right?
Exactly, yeah. At Guinness and Joe, they actually give this example of a hotel that had a way higher number of rooms than all the other hotels in the study.
Huh.
So it was a total outlier, but when they removed it from the analysis, it actually didn't change the findings at all.
So it's like a red herring. It looks suspicious, but it's not actually the
Yeah.
culprit.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so myth number two.
Myth number two is that you can just eyeball it on a chart.
Yeah.
Just look for those data points that are far away from everything else.
Yeah, totally. I've definitely done that before. Just look for the dots that are way off in their own little world.
Yeah.
It seems a little, I don't know, subjective, right? Yeah, it is. I mean, different researchers could look at the same chart and see totally different things. And those visual plots, they can be misleading, especially if you're working with a smaller data set.
Right, so relying on our eyeballs isn't always the best way to go. Okay, what about myth number three?
Myth number three is that we should always rely on these really rigid cutoffs based on complex statistics.
Okay, so even when we try to get all fancy with the statistics, we could still be messing things up. Why is that?
Well, think about it this way. It's kind of like trying to use the same size wrench for every single bolt.
Okay. Yeah.
What might be an outlier in a study with 100 people could be totally normal in a study with 1,000 people, right?
Right.
Each study is different, different sample sizes, different things they're measuring.
So context matters. We can't just apply the same rules across the board.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
A one-size-fits-all approach, it just doesn't work when it comes to these influential outliers.
Okay, so we've busted these three myths, but now I'm kind of thinking if all these seemingly sensible approaches are flawed, how do we actually find these outliers? It feels like we're walking through a minefield here.
I know, right? It can feel overwhelming. But don't worry, a Guinness and Jew, they've got us covered. They actually offer a way more robust method for figuring out these influential outliers.
Yeah, so instead of just, eyeballing it or using these random cutoffs, they recommend a three-step process.
It's a three-step process. Okay. I like it. Lay it on me. What's step one?
So the first step is always rule out any errors in the data.
Oh, okay. So making sure these outliers aren't just typos or mistakes someone made when entering the data, right?
Exactly. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one.
Right. Makes sense. So once we've triple checked for typos, what's next?
Okay, so step two is to see if that outlier is actually interesting on its own. Maybe it's a really unique case that's worth looking into more deeply. So we're not just automatically tossing it out,
Right.
right? We're considering that it might actually be telling us something important.
Exactly, yeah. It could be a clue that there's something else going on that we haven't even thought about yet.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah.
What's the final step in this outlier detective work?
Okay, so step three is where we really get down to business, right?
Hmm.
We have to test if that outlier is actually influencing the results.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? What are
Yeah.
the tools of the trade here?
So instead of just using those rigid cutoffs, we can use something called research design-based cutoffs.
Okay.
These cutoffs take into account things like the sample size, and the number of variables in the study.
So what might be a big deal outlier in a tiny study might be totally normal in a bigger study.
Exactly. It's all a context, right?
Right.
And there are these statistical techniques that can help us figure this out, things like DFFDs.
DFE is.
Yeah.
Now that sounds a little intimidating, but basically it helps us see if removing that outlier actually changes the story our data is telling.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a sensitivity test. And what's really cool is that the cutoff for what's considered an influential outlier, even using a technique like DFA-FETs, it actually changes based on the study's design.
So it's like having a custom-tailored suit, but for data analysis.
Exactly. It's about finding the right fit for your data.
Nice.
And these techniques, they aren't limited to just one type of analysis either.
Okay.
They can be used for more complex analyses, like, when we're looking at trends over time, like time series analysis, or when we're combining the findings of multiple studies, like in meta-analysis.
So no matter what kind of data we're dealing with, being mindful of these outliers is really important, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about understanding all the nuances and using the right tools for the job.
Right. Okay. So I think this ties into a bigger point that Guinness and Joe bring up, and that is the idea of transparency in research.
Yeah.
So what do they mean by transparency? Why is that so important?
Well, think about it this way, like, if researchers were more upfront about how they dealt with outliers, like what methods they used, what data points they excluded, wouldn't that make you feel more confident about their findings?
Totally, yeah. It's like showing your work in math class, right?
Yeah.
You want to see the steps, not just the final answer.
Yeah, exactly. Transparency builds trust, and it lets people see how those outliers or, the lack of outliers might be affecting the conclusions.
Right, yeah. So transparency is really important, especially now when we're like constantly bombarded with information from everywhere.
Right.
Knowing that the researchers are being open about their methods
Yeah.
makes their findings so much more believable,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it acknowledges that, like, no data set is perfect. There are always going to be those weird data points.
Right. It's about being honest about those quirks and understanding how they could affect things.
And, sometimes those outliers are the coolest part of the whole thing. They could be like pointing to a whole new area of research or like making us question what we thought we knew.
Totally. Yeah. Sometimes those outliers help us see the bigger picture even better.
Right. So don't be afraid of them. Explore those outliers. Investigate them. Let them lead you to a deeper understanding of your data.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, remember, not all outliers are created equal. Don't just take things at face value, especially if the findings are based on just a few extreme cases. Ask those questions. Dig a little deeper.
Be your own data detective.
Exactly.
That's such great advice. Okay, well, that's it for today's deep dive into influential outliers. We hope this helped you learn some new strategies for understanding how these tricky data points can impact research.
Yeah.
And be sure to join us next time as we continue to explore the world of data and research and all those aha moments that make it so fascinating.
Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop questioning the data.
See you next time.